Welcome to Say the World, an international writing podcast. My name is Mike McGinnis. I'm the communications coordinator at the International Writing Program and most recently the author of the novel Drowning Practice.
And I'm Christopher Merrill, the director of the International Writing Program and author most recently of a book-length poem titled On the Road to Lviv.
We want to start by reminding you that the Between the Lines application is currently open for students from inside and outside the U.S. Between the Lines is a creative writing summer camp for young writers who will be between the ages of 15 and 18 years old this summer. And the program brings together US based students and students from around the world to the University of Iowa campus, where they learn together from our renowned staff of internationally acclaimed writers. You can learn more, including how to apply, at bit.ly/BTL24. That's all lowercase, bit.ly/BTL24.
Today's episode is an interview with Senka Maric, who is a brilliant poet, novelist, and editor from Bosnia-Herzegovina. It was a great conversation, so we want to get right to it. But we did want to give you a little helpful context first.
In this episode, I made reference to Senka's writing sample. This is actually a specific document that you can go see yourself, and we wanted to make sure that you knew how to do that. So, when writers are nominated by various institutions, by US embassies and consulates, by our friends in a variety of organizations, they provide writing samples that give us a sense of what their work is, what their body of work is about, what it's concerned with, what it is great at. And they provide it in the original language, and then they also provide it in English translation. You can see both of those things on our website, but they're also conveniently linked to in the show notes for each episode of this podcast. Each episode, we put a link to the original language and to the English translation for that week's interviewee. That said, let's talk to Senka.
Trebalo bi spavati, ali ne možeš. Sad, kad si konačno otvorila oči, odbijaš ih ponovo zatvoriti. Osjetiš mučninu, ali ne povraćaš. Nakon prve operacije povraćala si satima. Bol je tupa. Želiš odići ruku i opipati sise. Proteze koje se pretvaraju da su tvoje sise. Ruka ne može da se pomakne. Pitaš da li je stala kiša. Pitaš puše li vjetar. Ne sjećaš se šta ti sestra odgovara.
You ought to sleep, but you can't. Now you've finally opened your eyes, you refuse to close them again. You feel nauseous, but you don't vomit. After your first operation, you vomited for hours. The pain is dull. You want to lift your hand and touch your boobs, the prostheses pretending to be your boobs. You can't move your hand. You ask whether it's stopped raining. You ask whether it's windy. You don't remember what the nurse says. She'll spend nearly the whole night at your bedside.
Skoro cijelu noć ću provesti pored tvog kreveta. Ti ćeš pričati, govoriti stvari koje ne govoriš nikom. Ispričat ćeš kako si opipala kamen u sisi i kako ti se raspao brak. Reći ćeš joj i da si znala da te varao i kako je bol bila prevelika da bi rekla bilo šta. Pa si šutjela, uvjeravala sebe da ne vidiš. Već tada si počela tražiti rak po tijelu. Uzelo ti je skoro 5 godina da ga nađeš. Sestra je uzdisala glasno. Činilo ti se da želi nešto reći, ali je šutjela. Nisi znala da li je zaspala ili plače. Gotovo ti je bilo svejedno. Trebalo ti je samo da čuješ svoj glas, da znaš da si živa. Ti u tom tijelu u kojem odzvanja bol.
You'll talk, say things you don't say to anyone. You'll tell her how you felt the pebble in your boob and that your marriage has fallen apart. You'll also tell her that you knew he was cheating on you and that the pain was too great for you to say anything. So you said nothing. You persuaded yourself not to see. You had already begun looking for cancer in the body then. It took you nearly 5 years to find it. The nurse sighed audibly. You felt that she wanted to say something, but she was silent. You didn't know whether she'd fallen asleep or was crying. You almost didn't care which. You just needed to hear your voice, to know you were alive, you in your body where pain resounded.
My name is Senka Maric. I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm a writer, poet, editor. I've been writing ever since I was a young girl, mostly poetry, but lately, in the last 10 years, I started writing novels as well. One of the things I'm really proud of is my work as an editor of the literature online magazine called Strane.ba, where we publish the literature of the whole region of ex-Yugoslavia and trying to overcome the borders and all divisions that we have in the area, especially in cultural sense. I think that's the area we can really reconnect. And my work has been translated in a few languages. I have won some awards, and I love what I do because I think it's a great privilege in life to be able to have such a playground as a grown-up person to write fiction.
Senka, if we might begin with what you just read for us, it's such a powerful and intimate kind of book that you've written in Body Kintsugi. And I wonder if you could say something about your decision to write in second person so that you're speaking almost to yourself, but to the larger world. And it feels very close. What was your rationale for that?
The thing is, the novel speaks about the illness, the breast cancer of the main character, and it's autofiction. It's based on my personal experience, but of course, it's fictionalized in order to make it, at least try to make it work as a real piece of literature. So it was really difficult because the subject itself it's really big, and there is some like. Almost asks you to be pathetic when talking about it. It's too emotional, so you get to response from readers, even if you don't manage to do it on a level of the language because the subject itself is so heavy. So for me, it was really important to write about this subject without going into insisting on the pain and stating the obvious. And obviously, I first tried it because I would think being autofiction, it would be the first impulse to write in the first person. And I wrote some, I would say, 15 pages or so, and it did not work at all. It was just like really pathetic. It was constantly asking for the emotion. It was sounding like, oh, poor me. And also, there is this objective problem that is really difficult to believe the person who's constantly complaining and saying it's in pain. So it's like a real problem of literature. How do you objectify something? How do you make it believable? So I've tried, which was the next logical step, to make it in a third person, and then it got too distant from the point. It was just like it had missed that intimacy, that like interior inner world that I wanted to portray in a book. And then I thought of the second person as the next possible solution, and I changed the text I had to the second person and instantly started to work and to make perfect sense. So from then on, it was going like really smoothly. And I realized because the decision was based almost on a technical level, but when I continued to work, I realized how much it has given a novel. It did feel in a way like the character is speaking to herself, but also in the same time, it felt like it's addressing the reader as it is happening to him or her.
Yeah, it was interesting to me as I was reviewing the excerpt today that there's a way in which the second person feels more like an I than the first person does. The first, I think maybe partly for me, and I don't know if this is your experience of it, but for me, the first person is such an established tool of writing fiction that it's kind of transparent, and I still experience it as a character, right? Whereas the you is not used in the things that I read so much, and it defamiliarizes it a little bit, and I feel like it gets that intimacy back that is sometimes lost in what seems like should be the most direct method of communication, which is that first person. But I wonder, I think people feel really differently about the second person from person to person. How do you feel about that relationship between the you of the narration, the I of the writer, and the I or the addressed you of the reader?
Well, I think in this case, it does read almost as I, because this point of, I don't know, would you say focalization in English, is the focalization of I. So it's really intimate. It's almost like a I, it just says you. And I was actually worried how the readers are going to react to it, because I wasn't really sure if they're ready for that kind of identifying with the character. And I did get some really interesting feedback from readers. Like today, I just saw on Instagram someone tagged me in a post, reader from UK, and she said like how she loved the book, and she said, and I hate when writers write in a second person, and I thought I'm not going to love it, but then I fell in love with this book, and it's going to be like one of the most important books, and so on. So it's a great compliment.
Yeah, it's a really strong stylistic choice, which I do feel like when I read a long form work in the second person, my experience of that book is going to be really strongly determined by how I felt about how they negotiated that particular question, right? Because when it doesn't work, it can feel like the only thing you can see in some ways. And when it does work, it has that intimacy, right? It felt especially potentially fraught to me as a reader because it is about sickness and because it's about this uncomfortable experience of a body failing. And so I wondered about your awareness of and relationship to, while you're writing, the fear that the reader is going to reject that second, like specifically because of that discomfort, right? Because even when you're not describing a failing body, the fear of being rejected when you describe things in the second person is, for me, that's where I start, is like immediately I'm like, oh, well, they're not going to like this.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I thought. And I wasn't really sure how they're going to react. But at the same time, this book was really important to me. And I don't believe that you should write in a way to please the readers. You have to write in a way you think is the best. And whether someone's going to like it or not, that's completely different thing. So I did make this choice that felt like a really natural choice to me, even though the truth is there was a great, like really well-known publisher from Serbia who was interested in this book, but they asked me to change it to the first person. And I didn't want it to. So, I mean, obviously that collaboration never happened because I do stand by my choices.
I think to reject a Serbian publisher has a little more connotation for a writer from Sarajevo than it would be for, let's say, an American writer arguing with an editor in London, right?
True, but then I had another one in Serbia as well, so it wasn't political thing. If I didn't, if it was stayed only on that, then it would be political in a way. But luckily, there was another one that was interested in the book the way it is.
Good books always find their publishers and their readers. Uh, Maybe we can use that as a way to talk about that larger project you're engaged with in editing, where you bring together voices from all of the former republics of Yugoslavia. And I imagine that on the one hand, can be a very fulfilling kind of work, but also has its challenges, doesn't it?
It does have challenges, but not so much anymore. I think the main challenges were happening in the beginning. Portal Strane exists for 9 years now. And I think really interesting thing everyone finds about us that we never had any fundings. We just do it out of our own enthusiasm. And I think the reason for that actually was in Bosnia, it's really hard to find fundings for anything. You can find fundings, let's say, for a couple of years. And then you have authors who are used to being paid as they should be. But then, like, you run out of fundings, and what do you do then? Your whole story, it's over before it even begins. So all authors know that we don't get paid for our work, like the editorial team, and at the same time they really appreciate us promoting their work on our side. So I think it's a really nice arrangement we have, and we don't have any banners or anything on our page. It looks really clean and beautiful and simple, and we publish one text each day. So that was one of the challenges, and we kind of decided we're going to do it this way. I know it's really unusual, but I think also it's really beautiful because people appreciate things like this. And I think it's important to make that kind of a first step to show that you're willing to do something just because you believe in it, that you don't always have to have like a financial agenda with you as well. And the other thing that we were struggling in the beginning, the first editorial team we had, is the fact that I insisted that we do whole region of ex-Yugoslavia. Obviously, it's harder to do it with Slovenia and Macedonia because they have different languages, but we still try to include them as much as possible. And I also insisted on the fact that we don't want to get involved in who's fighting who in the literary scene, who's against who, and things like that. That the only thing that we are going to judge is the quality of the text itself, in our own capacity to do it. So it turned out to be a good idea. So nowadays we hardly have any time, like room to contact the authors. We constantly have texts being sent to us, and we always have like a full schedule, at least 1 month and a half. And that's something, as I said in the beginning, extremely proud of, because now, thanks to us and some other people as well, of course, I'm not taking the whole credit for us, but it did bring all the writers of whole ex-Yugoslavia together. We know more about each other's work. We know what we do. We meet often, and we are all connected. So I think that's really beautiful.
You have changed the entire literary culture of the region, haven't you?
In a way, I guess we added to it. I mean, obviously, there were people doing that before in many different ways, but I think that we chose to do this kind of format and have a text published every day. It's the continuity
Yeah.
gave it like more weight.
Publishing a new text every day that's a demanding regimen, isn't it?
It is, but also we don't insist on unpublished texts. We don't really live in illusion that people read everything that's published everywhere. And I think it's also nice to remind them of things. So let's say someone's been published a few times in Serbia, but some readers from Croatia or Bosnia never read it. So it's always good to
Right.
put it out there.
I'm curious whether you have noticed, I mean, and you've alluded to this a little bit already, but what sort of changes you've noticed in, say, your submission pool and the community that's surrounding the publication across time?
We tend to publish like established authors, but we also always trying to give room from younger or new authors that haven't been published anywhere before, as to present them in a way. There is this person who's writing as well, and what often happens is that we get a feedback from these authors later on. They tell us like, because of that publication, publisher contacted me from this or that place, and there's always something that comes out of it. So I think the site is really well followed by both readers and publishers in the region.
Do you have a sense of how many visits a day you average?
We have about, and I know this only for the year because, as I said, we're not funded. So last year for my 50th birthday, I bought myself a present, and I bought it like whatever is called thing that counts the visits. on
Some
the
kind of
site.
analytics.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was my present to myself. And we have roughly about, on average, we have 1,500.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think that's, for such a small region,
Yeah.
still it's a great number.
Exactly. Oh my gosh.
One of the quotes that our research assistant found that I was really interested in was in a 2020 interview in a newsletter called Off Assignment. You talked about how literature had given you a sense of a place where you always felt like you belonged. And I was curious how that relationship as a reader inflected your writing. When you're writing, is there a feeling of trying to prepare a home for the next person, or is there more of a feeling like they'll find it for themselves?
I'm not sure I understand that. I'm sorry, just the last part.
So I know that when the war broke out in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that you were quite young at the time and ended up leaving the country and not to return until about 1997.
Yes.
And I wonder, we want to hear something about what those years were like and how that shaped you. And I think it leads to the question that Mike was raising about literature being a place that offers you a sort of home.
Yeah, yeah. The quote was, "To me, first as a reader, then as an author, literature has always been a sanctuary. I've been reading ever since I learned all the letters, and I've been writing since I was 8. Literature gave me a sense of having a place where I'd always belong."
Yes. Okay. The thing is, I was extremely sensitive child. Everything seemed sad to me and make me cry. Like I would see bee flying and like, why is bee alone? Where's her mom? And then cry. So I think for my family, as much as they tried, they could never give me enough support. So then I found literature, and it was the place that could take me away from where I am. That fictional world sounded more stable and felt more stable and secure, that my reality where everything was like so saddening for whatever reason. I'm not going to go into trying to analyze that. And ever since then, it was the place where I go when I can't process my own life, or not even in that way. It's more like I need literature constantly to like live parallel lives in the same time, living my own and not being too concentrated on it, because I'm living these other worlds, the books other people wrote and the books I'm writing. So it's kind of giving me more diversity in life, the feeling that I'm living different lives.
Was there a particular thing that you remember reading as a kid that gave you that sense of like, okay, this is a place where I can go?
First, I was read books as a young child, and I loved them. And I remember having these beautiful children books, and I still know how they look. But unfortunately, as the rest of the books I had, they were all burnt during the war in my house. But I remember them all well. And there was a children's library very near my house, and I would go there every day and bring books back home. And then I know I was 9, and my grandma really loved to read. And I was 9 when I took her favorite book, which was Jane Eyre. And that was the first adult book I read. So, and of course, it was kind of as comforting as much as troubling, like discovering this world. And then I pretty much read everything they had in the house. And I think I was about 10 when I discovered Agatha Christie, and I still love like detective stories. Yeah. I mean, I'm one of those people who could read anything really. I mean, not so much these like popular new writers, not writers, but yeah.
Maybe say a word then about the war and how it shaped your writing, your thinking, your life.
Well, I was 19 when the war started, and I spent, I think, 2 months in the beginning of the war in Bosnia, and then I fled and ended up in London, UK. And firstly, I think it has shaped me as a person, because I have entered completely different reality, in the sense that I did know some English, but I couldn't speak it well, so I couldn't express myself. So I think the first questions I had were about the language and like who you are as a person if you can't speak your language. And to me, because I love humor and I love when people laugh, it was really difficult for a couple of years. I couldn't be funny in English. I would try, and people just look at me in a really strange way, like what you're saying. So it was the question of identity and how do you find yourself in a different language, in a different culture, and how to learn to do different things. And also, before that, I never worked a single day in my life. I didn't know how to do anything. So I had to learn all these jobs like waitressing and hairdressing, and I was doing that. And I was quite pathetic at that age, I would say as well, because my library was gone, and together with the things I wrote, and there were like loads of it. Not that it was any good, but like loads of poetry. And I felt like, oh, my life is ruined. I'll never, like a drama thing, I'll never write again. I'll never read again, which of course didn't last at all, maybe for a few months or something. So I kind of learned who I am during those years. And I think that was the most important thing. So I think that has changed me as a writer. The truth is, I was 19 when I started. I never considered myself to be a writer before that. The writing was just something I do because I enjoy it.
And so you wrote the whole time you were in London?
Not really, no. For quite a few years, I didn't write at all. And then at the end of my stay there, I started to write some poetry again. I was trying to write some prose, some short stories, but I knew right away it wasn't good. I just couldn't find the voice. It took me a really long time to actually realize how do I want to speak in a prose text. And also, I think how I write it's something you would classify under the l'écriture féminine. It's really feminine type of writing. It's really tactile. It's really about feeling with your whole body. It's different in a way. It's quite fragmented as well. It's different in a way how men writers usually write. So with the first short stories I ever written, I've shown them to some established authors who happen to be men, and they told me that they are okay, but they look more like sketches for short stories, not the short stories itself. So I got discouraged, and then I didn't try to write prose for a long time. And then I wrote some short stories and published them, but I never put them in a book because I always thought, okay, this looks good, but still it's probably not good enough. And I just do it, but I can't do it well. And then I decided to write this novel the way I think it should be written without thinking whether anyone will like it or not.
Did your relationship to Bosnian change when you returned to the country? You were older, of course, the war was over. You're trying to find your way now as a writer in the Bosnian language. Talk about that.
Well, it was, I don't think I ever really left the language in a sense because, well, the thing is, my family says that I started to talk when I was 6 months old. Yes. So it wasn't easy for them. Sensitive child talking. So, yeah. And the language was really always really important to me. And I really loved the language and to play with the language. And I used to speak a lot. Now that I'm older, I kind of have learned that people don't really enjoy that much if you don't stop talking. So I kind of learned to pace myself. Yeah. But so, I mean, even though I lived in English for a while, some 6 years, my own language never left me. They were just kind of playing together. And I especially like when I speak to people who speak my language but speak English as well. So the beautiful creations we make there, like two languages combined and what you can do with it. But in a literature, when I write, I obviously don't use English, but I use all different variants of my language. And when I say my language, that means something that's called Bosnian, Serbian, Croatian, and Montenegrin, which are all the same language, but there are some slight rules and different things like Eastern and Western variant. And I kind of mix them all together. And I find that exciting, and I never let anyone touch my language in the books or in the interviews.
And what's the reaction to that mixing of these different, well, dialects, I guess you might call them, right?
In a way, yes, yes, I think that would be the easier way to explain it. The thing is, before people were okay, here's the example. There is this huge magazine who contacted me for an interview before this book, and I said okay. But the end of the like talking about this, said, so we're just going to like translate you to the Croatian version of the language. And I said, well, I'm really sorry. I don't see any point to be translated from one language into the same language. It's just like one letter would change somewhere and we still understand each other completely. And they were like, okay, sorry, then can't do it. And I was, okay, fair enough, you don't do it. But then after this book, everything changed. Like the same magazine contacted me again and said like they would love to do interview, but of course we're not going to change your language. So I guess you fight for your positions
Right.
in life, yeah.
I wondered about your relationship to the translation into English. There was another interesting quote from a 2022 interview that you did with Asymptote. The quote was, I wasn't getting emotional while writing it, but reading Celia's translation, I did actually start to cry thinking, that poor woman. It's absolutely amazing how she made something completely the same yet alien enough that I can read it and I feel just like any other reader. And that sounds so amazing to me to have that experience. Can you talk a little more about that?
Sure, yes, and that is, of course, true. But the thing is, maybe I should say this first. When I was writing this book, and actually when it was published, the first question I would always get in the interviews was, "Oh, how hard it was to write this book." And I would always reply, "It was, but not in a way you would think. It wasn't fine for me in the emotional way because majority of it was my own experience. I knew it. I went through it. So it would be really weird of me as a person to think of myself, the things that happened to me a few years ago and cry over them and get emotional all over again. So to me, I treated this experience as one would treat any material and tried to make it work as a text, as literature. So, and I also, in the same time, I was always wondering about translations. This book has been translated among other languages, let's say to Hungarian. I don't know one word in Hungarian. So I would always think like, I have no idea what's there. It could be the same book, it could be a completely different book. There is no way of knowing. But with English, obviously, it's different. And I was really excited to read Celia's translation. And I don't really know what happens there. It's the same book. She has managed in such a beautiful way to give the same tone, the same atmosphere, and obviously the same sentences. But something happened in the meantime, and it became to me something that can look at from the distance and not think like, is this sentence really good? Should I have said this or that? I could just read it as any reader, and it did make me cry. I did actually think this poor woman.
And it's Celia Hawksworth that we're
Yes,
talking about,
yes.
who's translated from all the different languages of the region quite expertly.
Yes, she is absolutely amazing translator. I know that she's been translating Semezdin Mehmedinovic as well, who was one of your guests in Iowa City once upon a time, I
Yep,
think.
yep, yep.
And Dasha Dendic as well, I think, and Dubravka Ugrešić.
Could you say a word about the title of your novel?
Sure. Kintsugi, I actually I struggled a lot with the title. I had different ideas, but none of it felt right, and the book was already finished. So one night I went to bed and I was thinking, and then I realized that there is this Japanese technique of repairing broken china with liquid gold and platinum in order to emphasize the brokenness of the object and to make it more beautiful with this, which is connected to Japanese philosophy called wabi-sabi that says the real beauty is in the things that have suffered through history, pain, and breakages. So I remember the technique and I didn't know the name, so I Googled it in the middle of the night, and there were actually two terms. One is kintsugi, and the other one was much longer and much harder for me to remember. So we went for
Your decision was made.
It seems to me to be the perfect title for this book, which is about repairing, about healing, but acknowledging at every turn the various kinds of fracturing that have taken place.
Yeah, and also we have like a different kinds of fractures in life constantly, and in I don't think it's only my culture. I think it's everywhere pretty much like that. We are, for whatever reason, convinced that we have to hide it, and that we have to show that we never went through the hard times. And wouldn't life be so much easier if we share it with others? And but I guess it means agreeing to being vulnerable, and people don't like that.
What is one really interesting thing that you've learned during your time at IWP?
Oh, one. That's hard. I can't.
You can say four, but we can start with
Okay.
one.
Before I came here, I didn't really want to imagine any of it. I didn't want to read too much of it. I didn't want to make any expectations. I spent the summer at the seaside, and I was everyone was saying, "Are you excited about Iowa?" And I would always say, "Well, I am, but I'm not really thinking about it because I don't want to have this anticipation and then have this idea how it's going to go." But since I arrived here, so many amazing things have happened. Obviously, the city itself and the university and all different programs with Witness, but still, I would say the most important thing to me is meeting all these other residents from all over the world. People I would never really have opportunity to meet in my regular life, and learning about their lives and their cultures and our similarities and our differences. I feel so much richer every day when I go to bed. I can't even calm down enough because, and I keep getting messages from my children like, "Mom, are you still alive? Mom, have you forgotten us?" And I guess in a way I am. I hope they're not going to listen to this. But it feels so emerging, this whole world with everything that's happening with all these beautiful people and all of you who are here as our host. So it's such a powerful experience in many ways. And I need to be perfectly honest, I need to find a way to like calm down a bit and to start seriously writing. Because for now, I'm just, but the thing is, I didn't do as much of actual writing, but what I did do, which is maybe even most important, in the easiest of ways, while doing all this other stuff, I've completed my next novel in my head. In idea, I have a full structure. And also, I was asked by Semesdin Mehmedinovic, who I mentioned before, to write the diary of my stay here for the publishing house by book in Sarajevo. So it's going to be a book. And I'm thinking really much about that and writing notes. So I just kind of feel that I need, I mean, of course, this is not true, but this moment I feel so full of energy and ideas that I feel that I just need 10 days to sit down and write both books.
Is it usually your experience that you are sort of like you have the structure of a book, you kind of have a plan before you begin working?
Never. And this time, well, never. I haven't written like 15 books. I have 3 books of poetry and 2 novels, so there's not really much room for comparison. But before, I never really had a plan when writing novels, and I had almost like approach as one would have to poetry. I really had to like feel things, and it was all about feelings and getting the atmosphere and the emotion. And it's really hard to write that way. It takes really long time, and you have to be in a special mood and special circumstances. So it's always like you're constantly on some kind of quest. And this time I decided the next one novel I'm writing, I decided I'm going to think about it, to have the full structure in my head before I start writing. And I did some writing already and it works well. And what I've kind of imagined to happen for the rest of the novel makes sense. So let's hope that's how it's going to play out.
And so, are you taking notes daily for the diary?
Almost, yeah. I mean, if I don't do it one day, then I do it next day, and I also try to take lots of photographs or download photographs that people put in our groups on WhatsApp, because there's so many things happening, and they're all much better photographers than I am. I'm usually just take phone and click really quickly, so like lots of things missing there. So yeah, I think, but writing the diary, I don't really want to make it too personal, especially because after this book, Body Kintsugi, was published, there was a lot of confusion about me, private person and character of my novel, and many very strange questions. So this time I want to really write about people that I'm meeting here in Iowa City and everything that is going on in this program and how it reflects on me and what I think and what kind of thoughts it brings me without getting into anything that's too personal.
Well, you are entering a long and distinguished tradition at the IWP. I'm thinking of the Georgian writer David Torshveli, who kept a similar kind of diary while he was here, and I have a vivid memory of watching him write the last words. It was in a big black notebook on the last night together, and then the book came out, and it was the best-selling book in Georgia for about 10 years.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
yeah. So let's hope the same works for your book with Smez.
Thank you.
Say the World, an international writing podcast, is a production of the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa. IWP programming is primarily funded by the University of Iowa and the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State, with additional funding provided by organizations like the Doris Duke Foundation, as well as donors like you. If you'd like to donate to the IWP, go to bit.ly/IWP-support. Links to further information and additional credits for this episode are in the show notes.